Hello everyone, this is Alejandro, and in this tutorial we will see how we can use the new cloner system to create all sort of different type of cloning animations and cloning compositions. We will go through all of the new features and also in general explain how the cloner system works and how you can use the different features to create different type of outcomes. Alright, let's begin. Okay, so I already have a very simple scene here with this cube of 75 units in all axes and a very simple material with this color and also a background with this color. I also want to disable the grid because I don't need it, and the helpers because I also don't need that. You can select the object, and if you scroll to the bottom you will see cloner right at the bottom here. And so I'm just going to enable that, and by default the cloner comes in linear mode, which means that it's going to create a line of clones like this, and if I increase the count you will see that it will be a lot of clones in that direction. Right here you can see a couple of things are happening already, and if you go here to the parameters of the linear cloning you will see that there is position, and it already has a value, and if you increase the value you can increase the spacing between each of the clones. Another thing that you can do is that you can increase the scale. So for example, if you increase the Y scale, every single iteration of this clone is going to have a wider scale. So let's reset that. Now if you change the rotation, for example like this, it's going to change the rotation on every iteration, and the same will happen if you change the rotation in this axis. Right? So this is already pretty cool because, for example, if you change this, the base clone, or you do something like this, you will see how every single iteration is going to be different. Now let me just do something quick about the material because I kind of want this to be a little more interesting. Right, let me just go back to the previous size. It's going to be something like this. I'm going to change now to Radial, and Radial does something interesting, which is that it creates a clone in a circle basically, and you can change again the count. You'll see different clones there, but you can also change the radius of this circle, and you can also decide if you wanted to start on a particular angle like this. So you can have a very interesting effect by changing the start and the end value. Another thing that you can do is that you can align the clones to point to the center. So if you press on alignment, you will see that they basically is like if they're going from the center to the upside. And you can change the axis as well of this, like Y, Z axis. If you change the position, you will see that in this particular type of cloning, the position is going to affect everything. But if you change the rotation, you will see that it will, all of them will rotate at the same time, and all of them will scale at the same time as well. And if you go to alignment in this way and then you do this, you will see that they maintain the same distortion. The other type of cloning is by grid, and when you go to grid, immediately it just creates like a grid of 2 by 2, and then you can increase the count. So if you increase the number, you can create a very big volume here of clones. In this particular type of cloning, there is no control over position, rotation, and so on, but you can control the size of this. You can increase the spacing here, for example, and then you can create something like this. I want to create a grid of 10 by 10, and maybe this is gonna be, if my size is 75, maybe this is gonna be like 80 on the spacing. So that's like the spacing between each other. Actually, maybe I can make this smaller. Maybe this could be like 40, 40, 40, and then this could be like 45, 45, 45. So it's a little bit smaller. And now I want to enable randomness, and randomness enables you to change different values of the clones. So for example, I want to change the scale. So right now what I'm doing is I'm creating a variation on the scale only. Or I can change like the position. You can see that now they all have different positions. And then if you do in all axes, it will look a little messy. If I change the noise type, it basically changes the way the randomness is sampled. This is how it works with simple noise. So it's a little bit more, it goes in both directions in this case. The seed means the initial value for the randomness. So every seed is different. So you're not going to have a similar seed anytime. So you can change it if you want to change the rearrangement of these clones. Just keep it in 0 for now. And I also want to keep it in 0 because what I want to do actually is to make this clone smaller, and then I want to change the scale. And I want to change it in all axes. So that way we get a more interesting random effect right there. A very cool parameter is called the movement. And movement is basically it's moving a 3D noise, so you can see how they animate. So that feels very nice. If we change the scale, if we make like a more smaller scale, what we can see is that the pattern changes and now it's more visible. So now if we make the movement happening, you can see how it's moving in a 3D space. So that's very nice. All right. So I really like this pattern, but I want to animate this movement. The way to animate is that you can create a new state, and then you can just change this parameter to 20, for example. And now you create an event, like a start event. You add a transition here in the actions of this event, which means that this is going to trigger a transition, and the transition is going to go from the current state, which is by default the base state, to this new state. And then I'm going to use a linear transition, so it's like a constant value change over time, and the duration for this is going to be 100 seconds. I also want this to be an infinite, and I want it to be a ping-pong cycle, so that means that when it reaches the end, it's going to play in reverse. So now if I go to the play mode, you will see that now this is animated. So very easily you were able to create something like this. In just a few clicks, basically, we were able to animate these bunch of clones here. But you can do a lot more, right? Like one thing that you can try here is that you can play with creating a duplicate of this. So if I just press Command D or just Command C and Command B to paste, and then we change this material to be something different, like this for example, and then we change the seed to be different. So now we have two different clones. So I want to change maybe the shape of this to be a little different as well. Maybe something like this, and maybe less. So instead of 10, it could be 5. So we don't have that many elements. And the size, instead of being this, it could be twice of that. Maybe it's gonna be times 2. So it's gonna be 90, 90, and 90. So now it's like a little bit spread over, you know, the space. And then what we can do is, if we go to the play mode right now, it's not going to be playing, but that's because we need to make sure that we are attaching the right object here, which is the object number 2. So now it's animating as well. So now it's a little bit more interesting. And we can repeat this process again, and we can just Command D, and now we have a tier 1, and maybe this one is a little like green, and it has a different shape, and it has a different sieve, so it's not in the same place. And well, actually, yeah, maybe it's okay if it is this color, but just make it slightly. So perhaps this is a little more spread. Spacing is different, it can be different. Then here we make sure that we are using the number 3 here. So now if we play this animation, we will have a bunch of very interesting movements happening right there. For the white clones here, we can change the material to be a little more interesting. And for example, like we can have like a depth layer, and then this depth layer could be on the world mode. Because right now by default, if I change this gradient here, you will see that it's going to apply the same to all of the clones at the same time, which is not ideal. So let's say that we have something like this, and then we have multiply. It's going to be on all of the clones at the same time, which is not so nice. What I want is actually to make this in a world position, so then I can make this bigger. And you can see that already is very interesting, but maybe let's reverse the colors. And now what we're doing is that we're adding like this depth to the middle of all of these, and perhaps the color of this, it could be a little purple-ish, right? Not so bright. And we can also reduce the general alpha channel of this. So now it feels a little more volumetric because right in the middle things are darker. So I'm going to create a new material asset, and this is going to be just clones. Just maybe clone 1. And now if I go to the play mode, you'll see that we have this very interesting effect happening for the clones. in a few minutes we were able to create this very interesting effect. But you can go way more than this. You can do a lot more if you play with different values and you play with different effects. You can change the velocity of the animation, you can make it faster, you can make it slower. You can also change other values, like for example rotation, and that is going to create, like, you know, all of these interesting randomness in terms of rotation. And now if you play this, it's gonna be weird because it's going to animate the rotation, so you will get all of this weird motion happening right now. But that's something that you can do as well, right? And you can control that and, you know, create different effects based on that. And again, you can change the scale, you can make it like way more detailed like this, and then when you play this animation, it's going to look, you know, more like some sort of like individual movement on each of the clones. And like if I make it really big, it's just going to be more like a wave, so it feels more like some sort of ocean. And instead of grid, what we can have here is that we can use object. I'm just going to press Option R to reset my camera, and then I'm going to create a sphere here. And I'm going to make sure this sphere is right in the middle. This sphere is actually going to be using the same material. Now I'm going to go back to the cube number 4, and let me just for now just delete this animation. I don't need it right now. Here in to object, I'm going to select the sphere, which is the last one here. And you can see that now the cube is being cloned over the surface of this sphere. So by default it's cloning on a random way, so it's cloning over the surface in a random way, and you can increase the amount of clones that you want. By the way, if you resize this sphere, for example, you will see that the clones will spread across the surface as well. So it's not like they will deform, they will just use a new surface area. So actually if I increase here the subdivisions and then I go back to the soft mode, you can see that they will use the curvature in a more efficient way because now the sphere has more segments. If I convert this sphere into a subdivision object and then I deform this sphere using the sculpting tools, like this for example, you will see that the clones will update to follow this shape. But let me just undo everything because we don't really need any of this. You can also change the way that the clones are spread to be on the polygon center, which means that now it will be on the center of each polygon. To explain this better, I'm just going to select this sphere and I'm going to change to flat mode. And then here you can see that on the center of each polygon of the sphere, there is a clone now. And if I change the size, you'll see there's more. So let me just go back here. Now, if you change this to edge, now it's going to be on the edge, basically on the center of the edge. And then if you change it to vertex, it's going to be on each of the vertices in here. So that's how it works. Another thing that you can do is that you can align the clones on an axis instead of the normal. So right now it's using the normal of the surface, but if you change it to axis, now it's going to be aligned to one axis. So what that means is that it doesn't matter how different the shape is, all the clones are going to be aligned to a particular axis, which in this case is going to be the x-axis. But it will make more sense if I make this bigger and then we change the axis in here. You will see that it's going to be using these different, axes. Go back to where I was before. And then you can also change the C, so different C. And then you can have different values for the position or the scale or the rotation, right? So it will rotate the clones. And you can also change the axis, but maybe this is easier to see if we make something like bigger. So this is the axis that it's using, but maybe if we choose Y, it will look like this because now we're using Y. In fact, if I make this even bigger, it will look like this, right? If I change the corner radius in here, you will see that it will also, it will change on all of the clones at the same time. So you can achieve really weird things. This is very interesting actually. So I'm just going to duplicate this material. I'm going to detach and create a new one because I want to show you how this look if we have like a different effect here. Like for example, maybe we can have another color here, and this will be maybe a little reddish, right? And maybe it could be like this actually. So you can see that how quickly you can build something really interesting, and you can control obviously this by moving the values in here as well if you want. This is how you can use the clone to build really interesting effects. You can also enable randomness in here, and it's going to be crazy, right? Because now you have these changes on the scale, but maybe we can just make it so it's more like each other, yeah, like this. Now we're making, you know, these bigger clones, and this is how it looks. I think it looks fantastic. Like, and that's another really cool thing about the clones, which is that you might get some very unexpected results, and they might just look really nice. Now, by the way, if you are wondering like what do we do with this object, you can actually hide this object by pressing here on hide the base. You can also animate these values. You can create a new event in here, and then maybe we can have a movement here, right? So maybe this goes from, you know, to 20 as well, and then on the start event in here, make sure that we create something like what we did before, right? Infinite and ping pong, and it goes from here to state, and then when we play, this is what we see. Another feature of the cloner system is that you can also clone groups. So for example, if I have this little tree in here, which is made out of 2 different cubes, I can select these 2 cubes, and then I can press Command G. Now I can create a bunch of clones, and I want the clones to be around this surface here, basically over this sphere. So I'm just going to enable the cloner here, and instead of linear, I'm going to use object. And for the object itself, I want to use this sphere. Now, by default, you can see that I'm not really in the right orientation. So let's change that, right? So the first thing is I want the axis to be Y, which is this axis here. So now they are kind of like pointing in the right direction, and I can certainly adjust this by just moving this. But another thing that I can try is that I can also change the position of the group itself to be on the bottom of this object. So I can do both. This is like an easier way, and there is this other way in which you can press Command and Option at the same time, and then just click on the object, so then you can move it individually from its child objects. And now that I'm ready, I can select this object again, and now you can see that by default they just have the right position. And I just want to increase the count to be higher, maybe something like this. So I'm just going to disable this for now, because I actually wanted to show you this other example here, which is something that it is already on the Spline library. And this is like a little forest, it's like a mountain, and if you click on the plane, basically this is just like a plane that I just sculpted using like the sculpting tool, and you can actually manipulate these even more if you want to, and the clones will update to the changes on the mesh. I'm using the axis orientation instead of the normals, because the normals will look like this. The nice thing about working with groups is that you can change the children of the group or the shape of them, for example, and all of the changes in the child objects will be updating the group. So you can do these sort of things like this, for example. You can also change like the color if you want to, and they will all update automatically in all of the other instances of the object. Now, if you notice, this cloner actually has 2 states, and by default the base state does not show any clones. And if you go here to the settings, you will see that the count is on 0. So the reason is that on this scene I have an animation that shows the clones as if they were growing, right? So this is a very nice animation in which the count is changing from 0 here to 100 in the final state. So it's a very simple animation like any other. You just have like a transition between one state to another, and then you have a duration. So in this case it's a short duration of just 4 seconds. here is another example of something that you can do using the cloner system. This one here is a group. This one here is just an individual object, and if you look at the individual object here, this was a cube that I modified. So for example, you can just create a cube like this, and then you can just make it very thin like this. Then you can smooth and edit, and then if you select the top part here, you can make it smaller like this, and you can also change the scale like this, and then you can just add like more segments like this one here, and then you can keep like shaping this until you get to something that makes sense. And then you can just move this a little bit to here, this one a little bit to here, this one is smaller. And once you have something that you like, you can just apply the material, which is a very simple material. You can see the leaf is just depth gradient, and it just go from slightly brown to a greenish color, and everything else is very simple. So that's how you can build this. And if you go to the play mode here in this scene, which is by the way available in the library as well, you can see that everything moves very slightly. We're using the same technique that we saw previously for animation. We're just animating the movement of the clones. But because there are 3 different clones in here that are spread, and it looks very random, so you can actually achieve this level of organic like animation or motion quite easily using the clones. Now this scene is a little different because it's very complex, or at least that's how it looks. And I just want to show you that you can actually achieve very wild results by using just one single cloner, which is this cylinder. And if you go to the play mode and see this experience, you can see how incredibly beautiful and complex and all of these little details emerge. And this is still just one single object that is being cloned, and then we're using the previous techniques in terms of animating the 2 different states and the movement between these 2 states to create this type of motion or organic motion. So let's see how this is built, right? So we have a cloner here, and it's a grid, and it has only one in Y and 40 on X and Z. Basically we are animating the rotation a lot, and if you see here on the second state, we just move between these elements, but because the rotation is very high, it kind of rotates all of the items in the animation, and that's why it feels like very organic. And you can see here, if I change these, it's the same, right? This example is a little different. It feels a little like a 2D motion. If you go to the play mode here, you can see that it almost looks like something that you will do in 2D. But the funny thing is that actually everything is 3D, and it looks kind of fun when you see it in 3D because it looks like all of these little algae or something like that. And essentially it's the same that we have been doing before. It's just that the camera is looking from above, and it is like an orthographic camera, so there is no sense of depth. Finally, I wanted to show you this last example because this is probably one of the most complex in terms of the amount of different clones that we have, but it's also super simple. Basically, it's just a bunch of clones that are spread, and all of them are also using, in this particular case, the grid mode here, and they all have like different materials, right? And they also have like a different base size. You can see here, like when I click on them, like the actual kind of like bounding box, it changes because they have like different sizes. Only 3 of these clones are actually animating. If you go to the play mode, you can see that only this part is animated and everything else is static, because this way we don't have like so much visual complexity happening. So it's actually quite simple. And then some of these clones are also using a material that is a glass material, so it looks kind of nice. And the glass material is this one here, and it just have, you know, the glass layer, and then everything else is just like a you know, a depth layer, and then the color, and then a matte cap, which is creating this little kind of like reflections on the top. And the matte cap is also one of the defaults from the Spline library. Alright, that's how you can use the cloner system to create different type of motion design using the Spline and animate these designs and create all sort of generative designs. And I hope you really like this tutorial. Please let us know in the comments if you want to see more content about how to create different scenes on the Spline using the cloner. Alright, see you in the next one. Bye bye.